Hi, and welcome back to the Press Rewind Prince Lyrics podcast. I'm your host, Jason Brenninger, and on this episode, we'll be talking about Head, track off of Prince's Dirty Mind album, and joining me to talk about Head today is Zachary Hoskins. I wanted to welcome to the podcast Zachary Hoskins. Hi, Zach.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm good, thanks. Yourself?
I'm also good. I'm excited to talk about the two dirtiest songs on Dirty Mind. I'm pretty sure.
Well, they are. Yeah, there's no question.
Yeah.
Even the song Dirty Mind really isn't all that dirty when you
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah, these are the two most explicit songs on the album, without a question. Very risque. So Zach, if you don't mind, just telling the listeners who you are and kind of where people can find you ultimately, if they'd like to get a hold of you or see what you're up to.
Sure. So I'm a writer. I do freelance music writing, although I'm trying to do a little bit of less of that actually, so I can focus on my big ambitious project, which is to write about every Prince song, at least that I'm able to hear. You know, there's a lot that we'll never hear, but every Prince song that has been officially or unofficially released in chronological order. I'm probably going to be doing this until I die,
Yeah.
based on the pace that I've been going. At least I've been doing it for about it was my 3-year anniversary just a couple days on June 7th, 2016 was when I launched it. So I've been doing it for 3 years. I'm on 1999 right now. So, you know, making very deliberate progress, we'll say. But it's a lot of fun, and I've been enjoying myself. I'm not sick of it yet. So yeah, please do check it out. You can find it at princesongs.org. The blog is called Dance Music Sex Romance. And yeah, thank you for having me, Jason.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. I've checked out DMSR, princesongs.org, and I think it's great. I think what you're doing is great, and it definitely is ambitious. But you know, I felt like the podcast that I'm doing is a little more ambitious. I didn't think it was all that ambitious ultimately when I first started it, but now once I think about the pace that I'm at, I'm going to be doing this for a while as well.
Yeah, it's funny, you know, you think about I stole the idea basically from a guy a guy called Chris O'Leary who did this for David Bowie. He wrote about every Bowie song, and it took him about 10 years, I think, give or take. And you know, so I was like, well, 10 years, that's doable. You know, that's a good chunk. Like I don't know what was going through my head where I was like, oh, that's a reasonable amount of time to dedicate to this. But for some reason that felt like, well, this is, there's a beginning and an end. And, I think there's a couple of variables. I think Prince's catalog is a little bit larger than Bowie's. They both had very large, you know, sprawling catalogs, but Prince has the edge, especially when you consider like the stuff that he wrote for the Time and Vanity Six and all those people. And then also I think I'm just slower than he is. So he got to finish his, and I'm now a little bit less, that 10-year time frame, I'm a little less confident about that now, but, you know, it's a labor of love and it's a hobby. So, we'll see how far I can get.
Yeah, right. And that's ultimately what my goal is to finish it at some point in my lifetime. And and I even have ambitions to maybe start it again with another artist or band or something like that I like. But I guarantee you I will pick somebody or some band with a much smaller discography.
Right. Yeah.
And that, I mean, by default, that means like everybody else in the whole world has a much smaller discography, but I mean significantly smaller. Like we're talking 4 or 5 records.
Yeah. Prince is you're biting off a lot, but
yes, you are. It's worth it though, and we both seem to enjoy what we do, so it's all worth it at the end.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, so the first song we're going to be discussing is Head, and that is track 6 on the CD, or if you've got the cassette or LP, it's the second track on side B. Mm-hmm. And Head is, you know, it's a kind of a funky song. You know, it's got a nice synthesizer line, And the lyrics, of course, this is a lyrics podcast, so that's what we're going to be focusing on, not so much the music, although you can't not talk about the music a little bit when you're talking about a Prince song.
Right.
But really, the purpose of this discussion is to kind of break down the lyrics of the song Head. And for me, Head has always been one of those songs where, when I first heard it, I was already, at least a late teen, I think. So I knew everything. I knew all about the innuendo and the dual meanings of the words, and I knew what head was. I didn't have to, get confused by
right.
what exactly what he was talking about. But for me, it was always like a song that, or actually I should say, it was sung in a manner that made it seem more dirty than the actual lyrics imply. But sometimes the lyrics are difficult to understand because of the way that the song is sung. And it's the whole mix of Dirty Mind is not the cleanest.
Yeah.
And some of it is difficult to understand by design or just because of how it was recorded and mixed and then ultimately put out there on the record. I'm not sure. Maybe a little bit of both. But what's your story behind Head? When did you first hear it?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I think for me, I think I heard this the first time on the Hits 2. So, for those who were alive at that time, or who that was when you were, getting into the music, Hits 1 and Hits 2 are broken down in kind of an interesting way. Hits 1 has, like When Doves Cry and kind of the big top 40 hits, and Hits 2 has a little more of the saucier, more ribald material. And so I had started listening to Prince and was getting into trying to discover more of his music. At that time, this was like early 2000s. This was still the era when greatest hits were a viable way to do that. It wasn't like a Spotify playlist or whatever. We were still limited to, individual discs that you had to buy. You couldn't just sample everything. And so, yeah, I checked out Hits 2, and yeah, this was, I knew Prince obviously had a reputation for explicitness. I can't say that I was like taken aback or shocked or anything, but it was like, yeah, this is what I was, this is kind of what I was expecting, and I was into it for sure. I'm in my mid 30s now, but at the time I was in my early 20s, so not a lot shocked me at that point in my life. I had already gotten past the hearing about oral sex for the first time in a song. That was a long time away by that point.
Yeah, and for me, I also heard this for the first time on the Hits 2, and because Hits 2 was, or the Hits collection, I should say,
right,
was what really prompted me to go backwards before 1999.
Yeah,
check out the first 4 albums of Prince, because I hadn't done that up to that point. I just listened to 1999 forward, because that's the album 1999 is where I got into Prince. And I figured, well, I had never heard any of the songs off of these first 4 albums, so they must not be that good, right? Well, the Hits collection corrected me on that assumption. And so when I realized there was quite a few songs on the Hits 1 and 2 that came from those first 4 albums, specifically several songs off of Dirty Mind, and I liked all of them a lot. So Dirty Mind was, the first record that I got after listening to the Hits, and I had to go find that because I wanted to hear what else was on there besides Dirty Mind, When You Were Mine, Uptown and Head, which all made it. I mean, that's half of the album.
Yeah, exactly.
Half the album made it onto the hits, and honestly, none of them were hits.
Right.
So it's a little bit of a misnomer, but it doesn't matter. I mean, in the 90s, the term hit made no difference when you're talking 10, 12 years in the past, because it was just a way to reintroduce Prince fans or newer Prince fans to older music. And like you said, no Spotify playlists or iTunes playlists, so you had to just get with what you could get. And making mixtapes was a thing, but you had to know somebody who had it first before you can get a mixtape of it. And I didn't know anybody that had Prince's first 4 albums, so I had to go get them myself, which was perfectly fine. And up to that point, I was gosh, I would have been, late teens. And I was listening to hip hop a lot at that time. So nothing was shocking to me either. I mean, I had been listening to NWA and Too Short and some of the other more explicit rappers at the time. So a song like Head seemed really tame in comparison to
Right. I mean, they get married at the end. Like, how much more conventional can you get?
Exactly. So Head wasn't a single in the U.S. I do believe it ended up being released as a single in maybe some other countries in the world, but it never was released as an official single. I think it made it like as a promo somewhere. But as you can imagine, this wasn't a song that Warner Brothers was probably eager to put out there and try to push for radio play. It was not one of those songs. If sure, it was a song to maybe support the album and maybe get people interested because of its. I mean, it's a good song. Let's just.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of one of Prince's. At this point, I feel like he had a couple of classics under his belt already. He had "I Want to Be Your Lover," which was both a hit and also just a real milestone in his songwriting. But I mean, this "When You Were Mine," "Dirty Mind," "Uptown," these were kind of, these were milestones in his development as a songwriter, both in terms of what he was getting away with, and how he was pushing the envelope, but also just in terms of them, just being great songs. And I think Head remained a staple in his live sets, more or less until he stopped, talking about things like oral sex.
Right.
Obviously, when he got a little more family friendly toward the end, Head was no longer part of the official canon. But I mean, it was a real key song for a while there.
Yeah, fan favorite for sure. Although it is often cited as the song that kind of the straw that broke the camel's back in getting Gail Chapman or causing Gail Chapman to leave the band.
Yeah.
At least how I understand it. And I don't think she's ever denied that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, she's, I think there's been the kind of initial story about her was that she found Jesus basically. And she has kind of contradicted that specific interpretation of the story, but she has definitely said on several occasions, like, I was not excited about singing this song on stage. And the stage act, this debuted in 1980, before the album came out, when Prince was still touring off of the back of the self-titled Prince album. And obviously performing a song like this with his good-looking female keyboard player who's wearing lingerie, it was they definitely played that up, and she had to do some kind of uncomfortable things on stage with him. And if you Google image search Prince and Gail Chapman, you'll find parts of this part of the act. There was
yeah, and so she was singing the song with Prince because I guess Prince had started to introduce this song in some of the live shows before it was recorded officially for the album. Because obviously Gail is not on this recording. It's none other than Lisa Coleman. So
right.
This is Lisa's song, and really, besides maybe some backing vocals, but Prince mostly did all of his own backing vocals up to this point. This is really kind of, unless you can think of another example of where he has a co-singer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this might be it. The only other thing I can think of is there's some uncredited Andre Simone backing vocals on, I want to say, Why You Want to Treat Me So Bad.
Yeah.
But nowhere near as prominent. And I think when Prince and Andre were harmonizing, it sounded like another layer of Prince vocals.
Sure.
Whereas, this is Prince's first, really, I think, notable use of women's backing vocals, and it's something that I think was one of the kind of defining aspects of his 80s sound. I mean, you think about like 1999, obviously with the Revolution, you hear a lot of Wendy and Lisa. With Wendy, Lisa, Jill Jones, later on Sheila E. Like, he used women's voices in a way that I think was really kind of key to his sound, especially during that period. And you're right, this was the first.
Yeah. And and at the time when I first heard it, I assumed it was Lisa. I don't know. Some people have made assumptions that this was either Vanity or I don't know, somebody else, but I always assumed it was Lisa. I don't know why. I think it's just because the way she sings this song, she's got like this kind of monotone, robotic coolness to it. And I just remember, that's also kind of like how they sing at the beginning of Computer Blue, and so
Yeah.
I just make the connection that way. I'm like, oh, okay, Prince just instructs Lisa to sing in this way for some reason, and it's really it's a little bit of an odd choice, but it works for this song because she just sings this song very low, very quiet, and like I said, very monotone, and just kind of like an air of above it all, like I'm just singing these words and they have no meaning, and but obviously I'm singing them about being a virgin and hooking up with this man I just met. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting way to approach the lyrics and perform them for sure.
Yeah, I think it's a really, I think, smart choice, and I don't know if it was, like you point out, I don't know if it was Prince's choice or Lisa's choice. I mean, definitely Prince had a heavy hand, we know, with anyone who was singing his lyrics in the studio, so he had to have at least approved it. But this song, I think of this as part of a kind of subgenre of Prince's songs that are basically like Penthouse forum letters set to music, and he wrote a good amount of these, especially when he was younger, and some of these lyrics that he's giving are she could have performed this in a totally different way. When she says, "I'm just a virgin, I'm on my way to be wed." But you're such a hunk, so full of spunk. It's like it's such a porny line. She could have really chewed the scenery there. And the way she does it, she's almost like rolling her eyes. So it adds this extra layer to the text that I think makes it interesting. It's almost a little bit it's almost a little bit of a resistant reading that she's giving it, that I think helps to kind of take away from some of the porniness of the song, and almost class it up a little bit. Like you're not getting a total like male sexual fantasy. There's a little bit of pushback here that I think makes it a little more interesting.
Yeah. I like the Penthouse forum approach towards looking at the lyrics for the song. So I'm going to quickly just dive into it. He goes, "I remember when I met you, baby, you were on your way to be wed. You were such a sexy thing. I loved the way you walked, the things you said. I was so nonchalant, I didn't want you to be misled, but I've got to have you, baby. I've got to have you in my bed." So here, the character Prince is playing is just basically hitting on her, just telling her how sexy she is, but she was on her way to be wed, so, she's got her wedding dress on. We have to assume there's no other way he would necessarily know that she was on her way to be wed unless she said something, but we'll get to a line later that will make it very clear that she was in her wedding dress. I was so nonchalant, didn't want you to be misled. So yeah, at this point he's just setting the scene, essentially, and just basically saying that he saw this really hot woman that was dressed up, ready for a wedding, and
yeah.
Instead of just saying something nice like, "Oh, congratulations,"
right?
I don't know who you are, but that's great. Hopefully your wedding is very nice. No, he wants to have her. He needs to have his bed.
It's the right of prima noctis, I guess. That's when Prince is entitled to women on their wedding day.
Yep. He had to have her. And so then Lisa chimes in at that point, "But I'm just a virgin and I'm on my way to be wed." So just reiterating reiterating that fact. Not only is she on her way to be wed, oh, by the way, she's also a virgin. So hey, there's that added aspect to it. "But you're such a hunk, so full of spunk. I'll give you head." And then they go into the chorus. So I like, the double entendre of the word spunk,
right.
Not just being somebody that's really determined, but
right.
not a go-getter necessarily.
Yeah.
Also, hey. So she's feeling it. She must be feeling like, this is my last chance. Yeah, it's experiencing somebody else before my wedding. Yeah, it's an interesting start, but like, setting the scene, getting the characters into play and making sure we all know who's taking part in this song.
Yeah, and I mean, like a classic porn setup, they get these niceties out of the way very quickly. By the end of the first verse, we're all ready to head. So there's not he doesn't waste a lot of time on the story, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Nope, not at all. Not at all. It's like a porn. And so the chorus is, I'll give you head till you're burning up, head till you get enough, head till your love is red, head love you till you're dead. So the chorus is interesting to me because I never really thought too much about any alternate meanings to the lines head till your love is red and love you till you're dead.
Mm-hmm.
So when I think now, I don't know what your thoughts are, but when I'm thinking till your love is red, I don't know if that's like a euphemism for just arousal.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm guessing that's kind of what it means, unless you have some other thought on that.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know what else it would, till your love is red. Okay, it must be like extreme arousal.
Right.
Love you till you're dead. So I never really thought of it too much. I've always kind of took it literally, like love you till you're dead, like until till the end of your life. Like this is kind of like I'm going to be with you now. This is the start of our new story in our relationship.
And there is the whole wedding thing, till death do his part. That's...
Yep. So there's that, but then I'm also thinking dead or death in terms of like an orgasm.
Yeah, le petit mort, like.
Yeah, right. So but I didn't know, that terminology. I didn't know that phrase at the time when I first heard it. So it was something that I came across later. I'm like, oh, I wonder if that could be what he meant with that too.
Right.
So, yeah, it could be, little death, or it could be till death do you part. Either way you look at it, it works for the chorus. So it's all good for the song, and it makes sense basically. All right, so that's the chorus then, and then we move on to the second verse. You know you're a good girl. I think you like to go down. You wouldn't have stopped, but I came on your wedding gown.
Of course it has. It's like it's Chekhov's wedding gown. Like if when the wedding gown appears in a song called Head, somebody's gonna come on it. Like that's just there's no way that wedding gown is coming out of this unsoiled.
Exactly. Yeah. It needs to have that finality to the act of Head.
Right.
And it can't be all just neat and tidy. It has to be spilled all over because hey, why not?
Yeah.
And this was way before the Bill Clinton Monica Lewinsky scandal. So this is one of the first examples in pop culture where we've got a or at least in music where you've got a stained article of clothing.
Right.
All right, so then Lisa says then, I must confess, I want to get undressed and go to bed. With that I jammed, you fool, you married me instead. So Lisa just said, I must confess, I want to get undressed and go to bed, and then Prince chimes back in, with that I jammed, you fool, and you married me instead. So yeah, there's the happy ending that we were looking for.
For everyone except presumably the groom, I guess. He's
well, it's a happy ending for those singing the song and them only. But hey, they're the only ones that count. We don't even know this groom. This groom is just a figment of our imagination at this point. We have to assume that he's a tool anyway.
Right.
If she's that eager to get rid of him and that happy to just jump into bed with Prince, then she must not have been that into him. I'm guessing it was some sort of, I wouldn't say arranged marriage, but probably some marriage of convenience, or maybe a high school sweetheart that maybe she was a little too bored of. Right.
Yeah. It's the kind of, again, this is a stock part of that fantasy. It's like maybe she's marrying someone else, but here's this man that can just like sexually do things that the husband can't.
So at that point now they go back into the chorus, but Prince makes sure that he makes it clear that they're not going to just do this, once or twice. They're going to do it morning, noon, and night.
Right.
So, wow.
It's really
That sounds.
interesting portrayal of marriage, I think.
Yeah, unrealistic.
Yeah.
Prince had not been married yet, so this is probably his fantasy. Like, oh, once I get married, we can do it morning, noon, and night. Well,
Right.
ask just about any married couple after a while, and they'll tell you that is just a fantasy.
Right.
But in this case, that's what's being implied is that now that they're together, they can do it whenever, and till you're burning up, till you get enough head, till your love is red, and love you till you're dead. So
And,
I can see when he says till you get enough, that there is implied there that there is an ending, like you can get enough.
right.
So that way it's at least thought of as an act that can be fulfilling, and it's not just like this cycle of sexual frustration.
Yeah, I think it's another thing interesting about this verse is that it's, obviously the first time we hear the chorus, she's giving him head, and now it's flipped. Now he's giving morning, noon, and night. I give you head. So it's reciprocal. And I think that's kind of a fun way for him to play with this slang term that he's writing the song around. Head can apply to both men and women, and he's making sure that both meanings are in use. So
Yeah, and he does that again on Jack You Off on the next album too.
right.
If you think about that, it's really kind of the same concept where he's using this. So in head, it's a word that is meant to describe or explain, oral sex, obviously, and it can be used, equal opportunity sex act. It can be considered equal opportunity. And although I think traditionally, at least where I was growing up, head was more of a term used to speak of oral sex on a man, but
Right.
I guess it makes sense. You can call it that for performing oral sex on a woman as well. But on Controversy with the song Jack You Off, he tries to do the same thing. I don't know if it comes across exactly the same way though. It's almost
Yeah, I could say I've heard it both ways for head. I have never heard, other than Prince, I've never heard anyone talk about jacking a woman off. So
no.
he was a trailblazer.
He didn't really catch on though, as far as I
Yeah.
know. He tried though. He tried.
Right.
But no, you're right. It's the same. It's really like the same thing. Like it's all about his pleasure at first, but then, well, actually, but he flips it. That's right. Because on Head, it's all about his pleasure at first, and then he makes sure towards the end of the song that it's clear that it's mutual.
Mm-hmm.
But then on Jack You Off, it's he's doing the pleasing throughout most of the song. He's jacking her off throughout most of the song. And then he flips it around towards the end. It's like, now you can jack me off.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And I just love that because it's like he makes it sound like such a treat. Like, by the way, you can also jack me off. Like,
yeah, I've always been able to do that. I don't know why you're making it sound like this big deal. So yeah, we got the synthesizer solo in there, and you got towards the end of the song where they sing it like with the hand clap motions, head till you burn it up, and then but the lyrics are basically the same from that point on.
Right.
It's a two verse and variables on the chorus, and then the rest of the song is just kind of repeating the word head and repeating the chorus till you're burning up, till you get enough, till your love is red, love you till you're dead, and makes it it's very catchy, I mean, you find yourself singing along towards the end of the song because the way they sing it and the way they encourage crowd participation, the way it's being sung, and it's like you want everybody to sing along, head, till you're burning up, and it's just kind of a fun way to bring the song to a conclusion, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a great song, and for me, being able to read the lyrics, because I'll be quite honest, like there's some lines in here that I didn't really know what was always being said.
Right. Yeah, his falsetto, he sings this is during a period when he's always singing up there, and it does make it hard sometimes to tell what he's saying, which I think, like you kind of alluded to at the beginning, gives the song a little bit of a Louie Louie effect, where it's like you can't tell what he's saying, so it must be something filthy, and
yeah, right.
and in some cases it's not. Stuff like "I was so nonchalant," like what a weird, I would never, if I hadn't read that written out, I would have no idea what he was saying there. Yeah. But yeah, it's so it takes a little bit of the mystique out of it, but it is interesting to kind of look at it in black and white like that.
Yeah, and Lisa's singing voice is so sultry and low that you couldn't always make out what she was saying, but I just assumed it was something really, really dirty.
Right.
I always just assumed like her lines were the dirtiest for some reason. I don't know. So that is Head. That brings us to the conclusion. I think it's a great song. It's a classic. It's a crowd favorite. And overall, Head is just one of those songs that fits into the the early part of Prince's career. When you think of his dirtiest compositions, the lyrics that are meant to maybe shock a little bit, because who sings a song about oral sex and not just singing a song about oral sex, because that's happened before. It's not like this is the first time. But we're not gonna mess around with it. We're just gonna call it Head, and you're just gonna figure it out just by looking at the title. Like, oh, I wonder if that's what that's about, and then you start listening to it. Yep, that's what that's about.
Yeah,
there's really no question.
Yeah, I think it's sort of, it's easy to, we're 40 years later almost. There's something almost kind of quaint about it, because music has gotten way more explicit, and now stuff that gets played on the radio is as or more explicit than Head. But I mean, at the time, this was pretty, other than artists who were just like blatantly raunchy, like people like Blowfly, like the super raunchy R&B artists that would never have gotten played on the radio, Blowfly, Millie Jackson. That's another one. Yeah. I mean, there was definitely like it's not like nobody had ever sworn or talked about genitals before in a song, but I think his proximity to pop and made it, pretty groundbreaking. And it's a different world now, and even 10 years after this, this was this had kind of become passé, but this was a lot more shocking, I think, in 1980 than it might seem.
And also considering that this came on an album that followed up a pretty successful pop record.
Right. Yeah.
The Prince album did pretty well, considering, it really only had one significant hit. I mean, Why You Want to Treat Me So Bad was a pretty decent hit on the R&B charts, but only one pop hit to speak of.
Right.
And it sold well. And then to go from that album and, kind of the pop and disco feel and dance feel of that record to like, oh, now I'm going to sing about oral sex and we're not going to fuck around with it. We're going to call it Head.
Yeah.
And and we're going to get to the next song, singing a song about incest, and it's just it was a big step for Prince, and a big leap of faith, I guess, for Warner Brothers too.
Right. Yeah, I mean, imagine like if Michael Jackson after Off the Wall had put out an album like this, it's that ridiculous. Like now, I think looking back, it's like, oh, of course, Prince was super risque, but this was kind of, we'd gotten a taste of it before in songs like Soft and Wet and, When We're Dancing Close and Slow. We've definitely, this is not the first that we've heard that Prince might be sort of horny, but this is definitely the horniest that he'd been. So.
Oh, by far. By far. Okay, well, I think we're probably going to wrap up this episode of Head. Thanks for joining me, Zach. I appreciate you taking the time and discuss this, this
thank you.
And interesting early song in Prince's career.
Thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone who listened to just two dads talking about oral sex. Like what a thrill this was.
Yeah, my kids are going to be horrified if they ever come across my podcast. All right. Thanks again for listening to the Press Rewind Prince Lyrics podcast. I've been your host, Jason Brenninger. I also wanted to thank Zach Hoskins again for joining me to talk about Head. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode, and if you'd like to get a hold of me on social media, I could be found on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook using the Press Rewind Prince Lyrics podcast handle. I really had a good time talking about the song, and hopefully you had a good time listening to it. Feedback is always welcome. Until next time, thank you very much.